All right, good morning, class. Happy New Year. This is Dr. Ken Nwani. We'll be taking BIO101. And today we'll be looking at cell, the structure and function. Want to look at what cell is, and then what the structure of the cell, and what's the function of a cell. I want to believe this is not the first time we're hearing what the word cell is. But let's look a little bit at history and how we got to the word cell and from where we've come to this point of understanding of cell. Robert Hooke in 1665 was the first person who observed a piece of cork under the microscope, and he found it to be made of small compartments which he called cells. In the course of observation of a piece of oak under the microscope, he saw a small compartment, and then that compartment he referred to it as cell. That was the first use of the word cell. In 1672, Anthony van Leeuwenhoek observed living cells in a drop of lake water with a special magnifying glass. These cells he called animalcules, meaning little animals. So as you can see that our understanding of cell and what cell stands for is actually stemming from the development of a microscope or the magnifying glass, objects that could magnify little beings or little objects into a bigger form so our eyes can actually resolve them. So as they develop these magnifying glasses or objects and now we're able to begin to see some of those small organisms or small things and compartments and living things that we study today. And so Anthony van Leeuwenhoek was able to see living cells, little living cells in the water he was observing using his microscope. And then because they are little, he called them animalcules, little animals. Much later in 1831, Robert Brown, an Englishman, observed that all cells had a centrally positioned body, which he termed the nucleus. You see, we're advancing. Now we know there is something called cell, and then as more observations, better magnification is coming up, more studies are beginning to emerge. We're not seeing that inside those cells, all of them has this central body in it that is common and unique to all of them, and then he called that body nucleus. You see, which means cells possess nucleus. And so therefore, you will now agree that the cell is the basic unit of organization of all living things. Remember in our last class, we talked about living things. And we say there are things that possess the characteristics of life. Being able to move, respond to stimuli, reproduce, die, obtain nourishment, and all that. So all of those things we call living things. Their basic unit, the starting point is what we call the cell. The cell is the basic unit of all living things, which means all living things are made up of cells. It is the basic unit of the organization of living things. We could now go ahead to say that the cell will be defined as a unit of protoplasm. A unit of protoplasm that is bound, that means surrounded by a plasma or cell membrane and possessing a nucleus. So which means cell is defined as a unit of protoplasm bound or surrounded by a plasma membrane or a cell membrane, and it possesses a nucleus. That is what definition of cell will be. We say it is a basic unit of the organization of life or living things, and in terms of definition, that it is a unit of protoplasm cell, which is bound by a plasma membrane or a cell membrane and possesses a nucleus. You see, you can now see that this protoplasm includes what we call the cytoplasm and the nucleus. So you say it's a unit of protoplasm that is bound by a cell membrane. That protoplasm is made up of a cytoplasm and the nucleus inside, and it is bound by a plasma membrane. Therefore, cell has three major components. Therefore, cells have three major components. And they include the plasma membrane, which is like the envelope that surrounds the protoplasm. You have the cytoplasm, which is the space within that plasma membrane. And then you have the DNA, you know, which in most times they are enclosed in a membrane, a nuclear membrane in some other organisms. In bacteria, it is naked. In higher organisms like eukaryotes and other ones, they have a membrane that surrounds the nucleus. So these are the basic major components that makes up a cell. The plasma membrane or the cell membrane that surrounds the internal space called the cytoplasm, and then the nucleus, which is made up of the chromosome. In this case, could be the DNA. So these are the three major components of the cell. Plasma membrane, they came up with a formulation, and then we'll call about cell, and we'll term it as the cell theory. And what did they say about the cell theory? They said that all organisms are composed of cells. One, that all organisms are composed of what? Cells. Remember we said that cells are the basic unit of the organization of all living things, which means all living things are made up of cells. It is the basis upon which they are built, whether they are composed of cells. And these cells are capable of carrying out all the functions of life. They're saying that in 1838 says that if that organism is said to be a living thing, then it is made up of what? Cell. And so all organisms are composed of cells. That is the first one. Two, that the cell is the structural and functional unit of life. The cell is the structural and the functional unit of life. That means it is the cell, the structure of the organism and its functioning is actually built upon the cell. It is the structural and the functional unit of life. All those activities of life that makes life living or makes thing a living thing are actually carried out by the cell. So it is a basis upon the structure and the function of life. And then that's lastly, number three, that cells arise from pre-existing cells. That cells arise from pre-existing cells. It didn't just come spontaneously from non-living matter. No, but cells arise from previously existing cells, which means old cells give rise to new cells by a process of division or reproduction, or as the case may be. They do not just come up or appear from the blues, out of nowhere, out of what they call spontaneous generation. No, but they're saying that all cells comes from pre-existing or previously existing what? Cells. So these three statements or stipulations make up what the cell theory. One, that all organisms are composed of cells. Two, that the cell is the structural and the functional unit of life. And then three, that cells arise from pre-existing